I think Redemption is a different film, and that's always a risk to say, you know, this is a different film. It's based on actual events. It's a Western. Regionally, it may be different a little bit. And I know that there are brutal elements in the story, but that's because it's a Western, and that's how Westerns are. And so the question as to whether or not it's LDS specific or it's, you know, this is a Mormon film, this is a much broader film than that. It's, I think it asks a question of anybody, from whatever faith, whatever background they may be, that they can watch this and say, oh, that presents a very basic human question, and then asks them what they would do in a similar circumstance. The story is about a man who is caught and accused and guilty of robbing 300 graves. And he is, as part of his punishment, he is disfigured, he is exiled, he's sent out onto Antelope Island without any food, water, any really meaningful way to survive. And it's left to a sheriff who has great reason to hate this guy. It's left to him to be the one person who provides some form of sustenance. But as I read more about this grave robber, then all of a sudden here's this Henry Heath. And I thought, well, now this guy actually interests me as much as the ghoul, because it goes back to the Porter Rockwell days. They have this governor, this federally appointed governor who comes in. Nobody trusts the federal government for good reason, and they chase him out of town and they seriously injure him. Henry Heath was the one who bought this Roan Clausen, who had attacked the governor and was shot and killed. He bought him a suit out of his own pocket. And there was something very Christian about that to me. So he was just going to be buried in the clothes he was shot in, and Henry Heath said, I can't do that. So he bought him a suit, they buried him. The family did eventually get to Salt Lake. When they went to claim the body, they were aghast because he had nothing on. He had no suit, there was no coffin, he was in a hole. And so they went to Heath, accused him, and this all came from Henry Heath's own writings. And we spoke to Henry Heath's great-grandson, I believe. And he said they wish they had more journal from Henry Heath. He wrote sparsely, but what he wrote was really instrumental because he had first-hand experience. And then from other accounts, I find out that Heath went out there to take him these supplies. So we tour the Salt Lake City Cemetery, and we see the graves of Henry Heath, of his wife, of his daughter who passed away. We drove down the street, at least, where Jean-Baptiste was said to have lived, a very close proximity to the cemetery and Marlis. We saw this kind of history come to life in that place, and it illustrates the fascinating early Utah history during those years. And so there we are on set, visiting and shooting and stuff, and in walks Henry Heath, who is the great-great or great-great-great-grandson of Henry Heath. And he comes in and he visits with the crew, and to see him, that living presence, right beside John Freeman, who's playing Henry Heath, was a little surreal. And to hear them talk to each other, and for us to say, forgive us, we're having to take some license with a dramatic story, and to hear him say, that's just fine. I'm just glad that somebody is remembering these significant people who went through a significant experience.
One time, my wife and I and our family were at the This Is a Place State Park, and I happened to introduce myself to the guide there and said, well, are you related to the lawman Henry Heath? And I said, yes, he's my great-grandfather. And they said, well, at every Halloween, we use that story of Jean-Baptiste as an example of a ghoul that existed back in the pioneer times and what happened in those days. And so it's been fascinating how it's come to light at various times in my own life, just by virtue of the fact that I have his name. It was a pure coincidence that we learned about this project, and through one of the actors, and when we learned about it, I thought, that's really a fascinating experience, because I've always been, of course, curious about my grandfather's life. He was a remarkable person, and we were invited to actually go to the set and see some of the filming, it was an amazing experience. First of all, to see him portrayed and to see how it came across. And as I've talked to family members, we're all very interested in how this turns out.
We've had to take, obviously, a lot of poetic license in the film. So even when it comes to Henry Heath, we have him as this kind of Mormon convert coming up from Texas, his historied background. And we hope Henry Heath forgives us for doing that for the sake of a Western. But I also hope that the essence of Henry Heath, this service-oriented man, is captured somehow, that he forgives those licenses that we have to take when we create a film. I think that this region is open to those sorts of stories that elevate the human heart or ask questions that we all grapple with. This is going to be relevant to you, whether you're LDS, Baptist, Buddhist, whatever your background may be. I think that it's something an entire family can see and discuss, but it's certainly going to be something that I hope they do go home and they talk about. I hope it's the kind of film that they're ready to see and discuss as a family and say, what did you take from this? The way this guy behaved, the way the community behaved toward him, what he had done to the community, what would we do? And you know, I think people are ready to have those discussions, see those kinds of films. I think that we're doing something that is a little bit more in a Western tradition.
Got him.
And says at the end, how do you treat a bad guy? How do you identify even a bad guy or a good guy? And what would you do in the same circumstance?